You're listening to NewsHour. It's live from the BBC World Service in London. I'm Tim Franks. It may have been Friday that a landslide ripped through a village in Papua New Guinea, burying hundreds. Today, rescue teams and survivors say that the ground is still moving, still highly dangerous. You get a sense of the impact of the disaster if you see any of the footage on our website, bbc.com/news. Car-sized boulders and a tsunami of mud, and people trying to do what they can with hands and shovels. Add to that the fact that this is both a remote region and yet in places densely populated. One local resident, Evit Kambu, told us she'd lost many of her relatives.
I
have 18 of my family members buried under the debris and soil that I'm standing on. And I have a lot more family members in the village that I can't even count. I am the landowner here, and thank you to all those who've come to help us, but I cannot retrieve the bodies, so I'm standing here helplessly.
Mate Bagossy is the United Nations Humanitarian Advisor in Papua New Guinea. I spoke to him from the regional capital of Wabag, having just returned from a visit to the site of the disaster.
We found a scene of complete desolation, I must say. Populations affected are understandably traumatized. The landslide is very, very deep, has covered 6 to 8 meters of depth almost everywhere, which makes rescue efforts very challenging. In addition to this, the landslide is still moving slowly, which makes rescue very dangerous. So this is just adding to the frustration of the affected population. It has been quite challenging and difficult, even emotionally, I would say, to be there today.
You described it as a rescue operation, and I don't mean to sound callous, but I mean the landslide was on Friday. You're talking about people being buried to a depth of up to 8 meters with the mud and obviously these enormous boulders as well. It's highly unlikely, isn't it, that anybody is going to have survived that?
That's correct. It's very unlikely. I do not say impossible, but it's practically impossible. The effort is about recovering bodies of victims. It is also very much linked to local traditions and the importance of proper burial. So there is a very, very active search and a dangerous search ongoing for bodies.
And we now have this terrible revised estimate of 2,000 people who were buried whilst they were sleeping. It was the middle of the night when this mountainside just sheared off. As far as you're aware, are there others who may be missing?
Here in Papua New Guinea, accurate population figures are very complicated. And I would be very cautious about the figure of 2,000 people. So what we have reported at the United Nations is 670 people estimated victims. And this is also just an estimation that is subject to change. So I will be really cautious about the 2,000 number.
How far is the rescue operation complicated by the fact that the other thing that I've been reading is that there's also, and I think this is long running, there's also been a fair bit of tribal violence. In fact, I think as recently as Saturday, there was a flare-up. Are there tensions which the rescue teams are having to navigate?
Yes, so this is indeed an important issue here in Enga. So Enga is one of the 3 most conflict-prone provinces of Papua New Guinea, perhaps the most in the highlands. So we have regular, intermittent tribal conflict of relatively low intensity here and there. And as we speak, there is a tribal conflict on the way to the disaster location. Today, in the afternoon, the situation had stabilized, but today in the morning, we still had some clashes in the area. This is not a direct threat as of now to the response operations, but it makes logistics a little more difficult because we need the Papua New Guinea Defense Force escorts just in order to ensure safety of the movements up and down of the relief teams. So it is an additional challenge that we have to work with.
I guess there is also going to be a major operation underway for those who somehow managed not to be caught up in this directly, but still need all the shelter and the food and the water and the medical treatment, which is presumably very difficult to get to them. What can you tell me about that side of the operation?
Yes, so there are several categories of people who need support. and several sides to this complex operation. I will say it's quite complex. One side is dealing with the dead and the search and rescue or recovery. Then there is another side of it which is dealing with those who have lost everything, managed to escape somehow, or who are about to lose everything because the landslide continues, slowly but continues. And then there is a third and more strategic question as well, which is the overall evacuation of the area potentially, which is a larger area, because more geological assessments will be required. But it seems that this area is very, very unsafe right now, and the total population that would need to be evacuated is in the thousands. So we need to address all those issues at the same time, although, of course, some of them are a priority, such as retrieval of bodies and provision of first medical aid, indeed, to populations, and shelter and food.
One of the things about this disaster seems to be that it's a remote area. And of course, it's been made more remote by the fact that the road has been partially cut off by the landslide. Remote, but nonetheless quite densely populated, it seems. What can you tell me about that?
The highlands are the most densely populated area in Papua New Guinea, which is perhaps counterintuitive at first, because one will think that the coastal areas are more populated, but not is the highlands, due to a very long history of rich agricultural practices, right? So the valleys are very populated. This disaster location was hosting some displaced households, at least from conflict-affected communities nearby. Of course, in addition to this, populations tend often to concentrate nearby roads. And in the case of the highlands have basically only one main road. And this is the road where the landslide has happened and that has been covered by the landslide. So this is, of course, a factor that increases the number of casualties.
And that was Mate Bagossy, the United Nations Humanitarian Advisor in Papua New Guinea, speaking to me from the regional capital of Wabag. As I said, much more about this on our website, bbc.com/news.